The Ethelgard Dominion did not merely rule the galaxy. They warmed it. For 10,000 years, their empire had expanded across the stars, not through the crude application of brute force, but through the absolute mastery of thermodynamics. To the Ethelgard, the universe was a simple, elegant equation. Heat was life. Heat was energy. Heat was order. Cold was death, chaos, and the enemy. Their civilization was built around the capture and manipulation of stellar energy. Their homeworld was entirely encased in a Dyson swarm, a shimmering shell of solar collectors that trapped every single photon emitted by their host star. This limitless energy was beamed across their territories, powering cities of glass and light, fueling ships that rode the thermal currents of slipspace, and maintaining the massive energy shields that protected their worlds. The Ethelgard believed they had conquered the fundamental laws of nature. They had tamed the fire of the cosmos. Because they controlled the heat, they controlled the galaxy. Their military doctrine was based on a single, unbreakable principle: overwhelming thermal output. Their ships were armed with plasma lances that could boil oceans in seconds. Their shields were designed to absorb and disperse any incoming energy, turning an enemy's attack into harmless warmth. They had never lost a battle because no species in the known universe could outproduce a star. To fight the Ethelgard was to fight the sun itself, and the sun always won. High Admiral Vex stood on the command bridge of the Radiant Dawn, the flagship of the Grand Thermal Fleet. The bridge was a masterpiece of Ethelgard engineering. It was bathed in a warm, golden light, the temperature kept at a perfect, comfortable 30 degrees Celsius. The walls were lined with glowing conduits that pulsed with the raw power of a captured star. Vex was a tall, imposing being, his skin a deep, radiant orange, his eyes glowing with the internal heat of his species. He wore the heavy, insulated robes of his rank, woven from thermal conductive threads that shimmered in the light. Vex was a veteran of 100 campaigns. He had crushed the ice worlds of the Kryn by melting their planetary crusts. He had shattered the silicon mines of the core by overheating their processors until they fused into slag. He had never known defeat. In his mind, defeat was a mathematical impossibility. If you had more heat, you won. It was that simple. "Report," Vex said. His voice was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in the chest of every officer on the bridge. Sub-Admiral Kalen stepped forward. He held a glowing datapad, his fingers tapping quickly across the holographic interface. "We have crossed the boundary into the Sol system, High Admiral. The fleet is fully assembled. 500 capital ships, 2,000 escort vessels, and 10,000 fighter craft. All thermal reactors are operating at peak efficiency. Our energy output is sufficient to glass a dozen planets." Vex nodded slowly, a smile touching his lips. "And the inhabitants? The humans? What is the status of their defenses?" Kalen's expression shifted to one of mild disgust. "Primitive, High Admiral. Extremely primitive. We have completed the long-range sensor sweeps. Their technology is based on combustion, fission, and crude chemical rockets. They still rely on physical projectiles and dirty atomic reactions. They have no understanding of thermal manipulation. Their energy output is less than a fraction of a single Ethelgard cruiser." Vex chuckled. It was a warm, rich sound. "They are children playing with matches in a universe of stars. They do not understand the true nature of power. They burn things to create heat, but they do not know how to master it. They are inefficient. They are messy. Shall we proceed with the subjugation protocol?" Kalen asked. "We will," Vex said, turning to look out the massive viewport at the distant, pale blue dot of Earth. "But we will not waste the fleet's energy on such a trivial target. Send a single vanguard frigate, the Sunspear. Let it approach their orbital space and demand their surrender. If they resist, let the Sunspear demonstrate the power of the Dominion. Melt one of their orbital stations. Show them the fire of the gods, and they will kneel." "A single frigate, High Admiral?" Kalen asked, surprised. "Against an entire planet? They have no shields capable of withstanding our plasma," Vex replied dismissively. "A single frigate is more than enough to break their spirit. We do not need to burn the whole planet. We just need to show them that their matches are no match for our sun. Kalen bowed. As you command. Transmitting orders to the Sunsphere. Vex turned back to the viewport. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This would be a quick, easy victory. Another primitive species brought into the warm embrace of the Dominion. He did not know that the humans were not playing with matches. He did not know that humanity had spent the last 50 years studying the fundamental laws of the universe, looking for the weak points in the Ethelgard's perfect equation. He did not know that Earth was not a fragile world of fire. It was a world that understood the dark. And the dark was about to swallow the light. The Sunspear was a beautiful ship, by Ethelgard standards. It was shaped like a teardrop, its hull made of a polished, golden alloy that reflected the light of the distant sun. It was powered by a miniature stellar core, a contained ball of plasma that provided limitless energy for its weapons and shields. It moved through the void with grace, leaving a trail of radiant heat in its wake. Captain Morven stood on the bridge of the Sunspear, watching the blue planet grow larger in the viewport. He was a proud officer, eager to prove himself in the vanguard. He had read the reports on humanity. He expected to see a chaotic, disorganized world, struggling to keep its primitive reactors running. Approaching the orbital perimeter, the navigation officer reported. No active defense grids detected. No energy shields. Their orbital stations are running on low power. They are practically hiding in the dark. Morven smiled. They know we are here. They know they cannot fight us. They are hoping we will ignore them. Open a channel. Broadcast the surrender demand on all their primitive radio frequencies. The communications officer nodded. Channel open. Broadcasting. Morven stepped up to the microphone. He projected his voice, letting the translation software convert his words into the harsh, guttural language of the humans. People of Earth, Morven began, his voice echoing across the planet's communication networks. I am Captain Morven of the Ethelgard Dominion. Your world has been claimed by the Grand Thermal Fleet. Your technology is inferior. Your resistance is mathematically impossible. Power down your military installations and prepare for assimilation. If you refuse, we will demonstrate the true power of the Dominion. You have 1 hour to comply. He stepped back, crossing his arms. He waited for the panicked responses, the begging, the desperate negotiations. But the radio remained silent. 1 minute passed, then 5, then 10. The silence from Earth was absolute. There were no frantic hails, no threats, no pleas for mercy. The human communication networks were completely dark. Are they ignoring us, Captain? The communications officer asked, frowning. They are hiding, Morven said dismissively. They are paralyzed by fear. They do not know how to respond to a superior force. Very well. Target their largest orbital station, the one in geostationary orbit. Charge the primary plasma lance. Let us show them what happens when they ignore the sun. The Sunspear shifted its orientation, aiming its bow toward the massive, rotating human space station. The golden hull of the ship began to glow brighter as the plasma reactor spooled up. The temperature on the bridge rose slightly, a comforting sign of building power. Plasma lance charged, the tactical officer reported. Target locked. Awaiting your order, Captain. Fire, Morven commanded. A beam of blinding, white-hot plasma erupted from the bow of the Sunspear. It crossed the distance to the orbital station in a fraction of a second. It was a weapon designed to melt through meters of solid titanium in an instant. But the beam never hit the station. Just before the plasma struck the station's hull, something moved. It did not drop out of slipspace. There was no flash of light, no dramatic energy signature. It simply appeared between the Sunspear and the orbital station. Report, Morven shouted, stepping forward. What just intercepted our fire? The tactical officer stared at his console, his eyes wide with confusion. I do not know, Captain. The sensors are not registering a ship. There is no heat signature. There is no energy emission. It is just a void. Morven looked out the viewport. his breath caught in his throat. Hanging in the void, directly in the path of the plasma beam, was a ship. But it was unlike any ship Morven had ever seen. It was not sleek. It was not golden. It was a massive, jagged block of matte black metal. It had no visible engines, no glowing weapon ports, no elegant curves. It looked like a piece of the deep void itself had been cut out and shaped into a hull. And it was absorbing the plasma. The blinding white beam of the Sunspear's plasma lance was striking the black hull. But it was not exploding. It was not splashing against a shield. The energy was simply vanishing. The black metal was drinking the plasma, absorbing the immense thermal energy without glowing, without heating up, without showing any reaction at all. "Cut the fire!" Morven yelled, panic finally piercing his arrogance. "Cut the plasma lance. Rear out power to the shields." The tactical officer slammed his hand on the console. The plasma beam cut off. The black ship hung in the void, completely unchanged. It had just absorbed the energy of a weapon that could melt a city, and it didn't even look warm. "Scan that vessel," Morven ordered, his voice trembling. "Tell me what it is. Tell me how it absorbed that much heat." The sensor officer worked frantically, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. "Captain, the sensors are returning impossible data. The object's surface temperature is exactly 3 degrees above absolute zero. It is colder than the background radiation of space. It is not just absorbing the heat. It is pulling it out of the surrounding vacuum. It is creating a localized thermal vacuum." Morven stared at the black ship. A cold knot of dread formed in his stomach. The Ethelgard fought with heat. They understood heat. But this ship was an affront to their entire philosophy. It was a hole in the universe, a place where heat went to die. "Hail the flagship," Morven whispered. "Tell High Admiral Vex we have found their warship. And tell him we are in trouble." Aboard the Radiant Dawn, High Admiral Vex watched the telemetry data from the Sunspear with a deep, growing frown. The bridge, usually a place of warm confidence, felt suddenly chilly, though the climate control was still set to a perfect 30 degrees. "A thermal vacuum?" Vex repeated, his voice low. "That is impossible. The laws of thermodynamics dictate that energy cannot be destroyed, only transferred. If the human ship absorbed the plasma, it must be radiating that heat somewhere. It must be glowing. It must be venting. The sensors confirm it, High Admiral," his chief science officer Xyler said. Xyler was an older Ethelgard, his orange skin dull and faded with age. He looked deeply unsettled. "The human vessel is not radiating the heat. It is converting it or storing it or simply deleting it from the local thermodynamic equation. Its internal temperature remains at near absolute zero. It is an entropy sink." Vex slammed his fist on the console. "Do not use human terms with me, Xyler. Entropy is the enemy. Entropy is the decay of order. If this ship is manipulating entropy, it is a violation of the natural order. It is a trick, a sensor glitch." "It is not a glitch, Admiral," Xyler said quietly. "The Sunspear is reporting that the local space around the human ship is cooling. The ambient temperature of the vacuum is dropping. The human ship is accelerating the heat death of its immediate surroundings." Vex stared at the main screen. The black ship hung there, a silent, dark monolith against the backdrop of the stars. It was ugly. It was brutal. It lacked the grace and light of Ethelgard engineering. But it had just swallowed a plasma lance without flinching. "Captain Morven," Vex said, opening a channel to the frigate. "You are to engage the target. Do not use the plasma lance. Use the thermal torpedoes. Overwhelm it with sheer volume of heat. Burn it until it has no choice but to vent." "High Admiral," Morven's voice came back, tight with anxiety. "Our thermal torpedoes rely on the target's shields absorbing the impact to trigger the detonation. If this ship has no shields, if it just absorbs the heat passively, the torpedoes might not detonate. They might just be absorbed." "Then use the kinetic batteries," Vex snapped. "Fire everything you have, Morven. Show me that this black anomaly can withstand the wrath of the Dominion." On the screen, the Sunspear shifted its position. It launched a volley of thermal torpedoes, bright streaks of contained fire that raced toward the black ship. The torpedoes struck the matte black hull and vanished. There were no explosions. There were no flashes of light. The torpedoes simply ceased to exist, their thermal energy swallowed by the void of the human vessel. Next, the Sunspear fired its kinetic railguns, sending a barrage of solid metal slugs at the black ship. The slugs struck the hull and shattered. The black metal was so incredibly cold, so dense with localized gravity, that the kinetic impact simply transferred the energy into the ship's mass, slowing the slugs to a halt before they could penetrate the armor. The Sunspear was throwing everything it had at the human ship, and the human ship was doing nothing but drinking it in. Then the human ship moved. It did not use thrusters. There was no flare of exhaust. It simply glided forward, closing the distance to the Sunspear with terrifying speed. As it moved, the sensors on the Radiant Dawn began to scream. "Admiral!" Xyler shouted, his voice rising in panic. "The human ship is activating a field. It is not an energy shield. It is a thermodynamic inversion field. It is expanding rapidly. The temperature in the space around the Sunspear is dropping. 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 50 degrees below zero." Vex watched in horror as the telemetry from the Sunspear began to degrade. The golden hull of the frigate, designed to reflect and radiate heat, was suddenly faced with an environment that had no heat to radiate. The field was pulling the thermal energy out of the ship's very structure. "Morven, retreat," Vex ordered. "Pull back out of the field's range." "We are trying, Admiral." Morven's voice was strained, distorted by static. "The engines, the plasma reactor is losing pressure. The thermal containment field is failing. The cold, it is penetrating the hull. The lubricants in the engine block are freezing. We are losing maneuverability." On the main screen, the beautiful golden Sunspear began to dim. The glowing conduits along its hull flickered and died. The radiant orange light of its engines faded to a dull, sickly yellow, then to a weak red. The ship was freezing to death in the vacuum of space. "Admiral," Xyler whispered, his eyes wide with terror. "The Sunspear's reactor has scrammed. The core has gone cold. The ship is dead in the water." Vex stood in silence. The bridge of the Radiant Dawn was completely quiet. The warm, golden light suddenly felt oppressive, mocking the death of their vanguard. They had sent a single frigate to teach the humans a lesson. Instead, the humans had reached into the frigate's chest and stopped its heart. The Ethelgard Dominion had never known defeat. But as Vex looked at the dark, silent shape of the human warship, he realized that the rules of the game had just changed. Deep beneath the surface of the Earth in the Global Defense Command Center, Captain Elias Thorne watched the main tactical display. The room was cool, the air conditioning humming quietly. Thorne was a man in his late 40s, with a face carved from granite and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple, dark gray uniform. He did not look like a man who had just defeated an alien armada. He looked like a man who was doing his job. "Target status," Thorne said, his voice calm and even. "The Ethelgard frigate's reactor is completely cold," the tactical officer replied. "Life support is failing. Their internal temperature is dropping rapidly. They have no power, no weapons, and no shields. They are drifting." "Good," Thorne said. "Keep the entropy anchor at 20% output. Let them feel the chill, but don't freeze the crew just yet. I want them conscious enough to send a message back to their flagship." The UNS 0 was humanity's first true warship. It was not built to fight like an Ethelgard ship. The Ethelgard fought by creating massive amounts of heat and directing it at the enemy. Humanity had realized early on that trying to out-heat the Ethelgard was a losing battle. The Ethelgard had stars, humans only had planets. So humanity didn't try to out-heat them. They decided to out-cool them. The 0 was powered by an entropy anchor. It was a device that didn't generate energy. It accelerated thermodynamic decay. It created a localized field where the laws of entropy were weaponized. It pulled heat from the surrounding environment and converted it into a stable, inert mass. In simple terms, it made things cold. Very, very cold. The Ethelgard shields were designed to absorb and disperse energy. But the entropy anchor didn't attack with energy. It attacked by removing energy. You cannot disperse heat if there is no heat to disperse. The Ethelgard's greatest strength, their reliance on thermal dynamics, was their fatal weakness against a weapon that simply turned the heat off. "Captain," the communications officer said, "the Ethelgard flagship, the Radiant Dawn, is hailing us." Thorn nodded. "Put it on the main screen. Let's see what the High Admiral has to say." The screen flickered, and the face of High Admiral Vex appeared. He looked furious. His orange skin was flushed a deep, angry red, and his glowing eyes were narrowed in contempt. "Human Commander," Vex's voice boomed through the speakers, translated perfectly by the AI. "You have destroyed my vanguard. You have used a cowardly, unnatural trick to freeze my ship. This is an act of war against the Grand Thermal Fleet. I am giving you one chance to surrender. Power down your anomaly and prepare to be boarded. If you refuse, I will unleash the full power of my fleet. I will burn your ship until it turns to ash." Thorn looked at the screen. He didn't look angry. He didn't look afraid. He just looked tired. "High Admiral Vex," Thorn said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the bridge. "You misunderstand what just happened. We didn't destroy your ship. We just showed it the natural end state of the universe. Your ship relied on heat to function. We took the heat away. That's not a trick. That's physics." Vex sneered. "Physics is the domain of the Ethelgard. We master the fire of the stars. You cannot defeat us with cold. Cold is weakness. Cold is death. Cold is just the absence of energy, Admiral," Thorn replied evenly. "And right now your fleet is full of energy, which means my ship has a lot of work to do." "You are a fool," Vex spat. "You think one ship can stand against 500 capital ships? We will overwhelm your little vacuum. We will pour so much heat into that field that it will collapse under the weight of our power. Fleet advance. All ships, charge primary weapons. Target the human vessel. Burn it out of the sky." The screen went dark. Thorn turned to his tactical officer. "They're coming in. All of them." "Yes, sir," the officer replied, his fingers flying across the console. "The entire Ethelgard fleet is accelerating. They are charging their plasma lances. They are going to try to overwhelm the entropy anchor with sheer thermal output." Thorn nodded slowly. "They don't understand how the anchor works. They think it's a shield that can be overloaded. They don't realize it's a drain. The more heat they pump into the field, the faster it will consume it. And the colder the field will get." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the console. "Increase the anchor's output to 50%. Expand the field to encompass the entire approaching fleet. Let's show them what happens when you try to outburn the void." The Ethelgard fleet moved like a swarm of golden wasps. 500 capital ships, their hulls glowing with the contained power of miniature stars, advanced on the 0 point. They formed a massive semicircular formation, surrounding the black human ship. On the bridge of the Radiant Dawn, Vex watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The sheer volume of energy his fleet was generating was staggering. The sensors showed that the combined thermal output of the 500 ships was equivalent to the energy output of a small red dwarf star. "Target the human vessel," Vex ordered. "All ships, fire plasma lances. Maximum yield. Do not stop until the target is vaporized." Space lit up with blinding, terrifying light. 500 beams of superheated plasma, each capable of melting a city, streaked toward the 0 point. The combined fire was a tidal wave of destruction, a wall of white-hot death that nothing in the galaxy could withstand. The beams struck the 0 point, or rather, they struck the entropy field. The field, now expanded to a diameter of 10,000 kilometers, flared with a deep, dark purple light. It was not the bright, angry light of energy being absorbed. It was the dull, heavy light of energy being erased. The plasma beams hit the field and simply vanished. The immense thermal energy was stripped from the plasma, cooling it instantly from millions of degrees to absolute zero. The plasma turned into solid, frozen chunks of ionized gas, which then shattered into harmless dust against the black hull of the human ship. The 0 point didn't even shudder. It just kept drinking. "Report!" Vex shouted, leaning over the console. "Why is the target not destroyed? Why is the field not collapsing?" Xyler, the science officer, was staring at his screen in absolute horror. His hands were shaking. "Admiral, the field is not collapsing. It is expanding. The human ship is using the energy from our plasma to power the anchor. The more heat we feed it, the stronger the field gets. It is converting our thermal energy into thermodynamic decay." "That is impossible," Vex roared. "Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It must go somewhere. It is being converted into mass," Xyler whispered, his voice trembling. "The ship is growing denser. It is turning our fire into gravity. Admiral, the local gravitational constant is shifting. The ship is becoming a microsingularity of cold." On the tactical display, the purple hue of the entropy field began to spread. It washed over the vanguard of the Ethelgard fleet. The effects were immediate and catastrophic. The Ethelgard ships were designed to operate in high-heat environments. Their hulls were built to reflect and radiate thermal energy. They were not designed to withstand the sudden, violent removal of heat. As the entropy field washed over them, the temperature of their hulls dropped precipitously. The golden alloy of their armor, designed to be flexible and resilient at high temperatures, became brittle as glass. The thermal stress of the sudden cooling caused microfractures to appear across the hulls of the ships. "Admiral!" the tactical officer screamed. "The Vanguard ships are reporting hull breaches. The metal is shattering. Their thermal regulators are failing. Reroute power to the internal heaters," Vex ordered, panic finally creeping into his voice. "Burn the reactors hotter to compensate." "We can't," Xyler cried. "The cold is penetrating the reactor containment fields. The plasma inside the reactors is cooling. The magnetic bottles are losing cohesion. The reactors are scramming." One by one, the golden ships of the Ethelgard Vanguard began to die. Their glowing engines flickered and went dark. Their shields, reliant on a constant flow of thermal energy to maintain their integrity, collapsed like soap bubbles. The beautiful, radiant fleet was turning gray, then black, as the heat was ripped from their very cores. Vex watched in stunned silence as 3 of his capital ships simply broke apart. The thermal stress was too great. The hulls shattered into millions of pieces, the frozen debris drifting away into the void. They had never known defeat. They had never faced an enemy that didn't fight back with fire. They had spent 10,000 years mastering the sun, and in 10 minutes, humanity had shown them the terrifying power of the dark. The battle was not a battle. It was an execution. The 0 point sat in the center of the Ethelgard fleet, a silent, black monolith, drinking the fire of the gods. The entropy field continued to expand, fed by the desperate, futile plasma volleys of the Ethelgard ships. Every beam of heat they fired only made the field stronger, colder, and wider. Inside the Ethelgard ships, the situation was descending into absolute horror. The Ethelgard were a species that thrived on heat. Their biology was tied to high temperatures. Their ships were kept at a sweltering 30 degrees Celsius. But as the entropy field washed over the fleet, the internal temperatures began to plummet. On the bridge of the Radiant Dawn, the golden lights flickered and died, replaced by the dull, red glow of emergency chemical backups. The temperature on the bridge dropped from 30 degrees to 10, then to 0. Vex's breath plumed in the air as white clouds of condensation. His orange skin was turning a pale, sickly yellow. He could feel the cold seeping into his bones, slowing his heart, making his thoughts sluggish. "Admiral," Xyler stammered, his teeth chattering violently. The fleet is dying. Over 200 ships have lost main power. Their reactors are frozen. Their life support is failing. The internal temperature on most ships is below -40 degrees. Vex gripped the edge of the console, his fingers numb. Why Why are the shields not holding? Why are the heaters not working? The heaters require power, Admiral, Xyler whispered, his eyes dimming. And the power requires heat. The entropy field is creating a feedback loop. It is pulling the heat from the reactors, which kills the power, which kills the heaters, which allows the cold to penetrate deeper. We are fighting a losing equation. The universe wants to be cold, Admiral. And the humans have given it a push. Vex looked out the viewport. The once magnificent Grand Thermal Fleet was a graveyard of frozen ghosts. The golden ships were now dull, gray husks, covered in a layer of frozen atmospheric condensation. They drifted aimlessly, their engines dead, their weapons silent. The fighters, the thousands of small, agile craft that swarmed around the capital ships, fared even worse. Their small reactors froze in seconds. The pilots, encased in lightweight thermal suits, froze to death in their cockpits before they could even eject. It was a massacre of thermodynamics. The Ethelgard had brought the fire of 1,000 suns, and humanity had simply turned off the lights. Admiral, the communications officer said, his voice barely a whisper. The 0 point is hailing us again. Vex stared at the screen. He didn't want to answer. He wanted to close his eyes and let the cold take him. But his pride, the ingrained arrogance of 10,000 years of victory, forced him to stand up straight. Put it on, he rasped. The screen flickered to life. Captain Elias Thorne was still there. He looked exactly the same as before. Calm, collected, unbothered by the cold. Hi, Admiral Vex, Thorne said. Your fleet is dead in the water. Your reactors are frozen. Your crew is freezing to death. I am giving you the chance to surrender. Order your remaining ships to power down completely and prepare to be boarded. If you do, we will tow your ships to a warm orbit and let your crew thaw. If you refuse, the entropy field will continue to expand, and your ships will shatter like glass. Vex looked at the human. He saw no malice in Thorne's eyes. He saw no joy in the victory. He just saw the cold, hard reality of a species that had looked at the Ethelgard's perfect equation and found the flaw. You have broken the laws of nature, Vex whispered. No, Admiral, Thorne replied softly. We just enforced them. You forgot that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. You forgot that the universe is slowly cooling down. You spent 10,000 years building fires, ignoring the fact that the wood eventually runs out. We just reminded you of the dark. Vex closed his eyes. The cold was in his chest now. His heart was beating slowly, struggling to pump the thick, chilled blood through his veins. He thought of his homeworld, the Dyson swarm, the endless, golden light. He realized, with a profound sense of despair, that he would never see it again. We surrender, Vex whispered. He opened his eyes and looked at his communications officer. Broadcast the order. All surviving ships. Power down. Surrender to the humans. The officer nodded weakly and tapped the console. The surrender signal went out across the frozen fleet. The 0 point stopped firing. The entropy field stabilized, holding the Ethelgard ships in a grip of absolute zero. The battle was over. The Ethelgard Dominion, the masters of the fire, had been broken by the cold. The aftermath of the battle was a logistical nightmare, but humanity was prepared. The 0 point maintained the entropy field at a low, stable level, just enough to keep the Ethelgard ships frozen and powerless, but not so cold that the crews would die. Human salvage tugs, heavily insulated and equipped with thermal lances, moved into the debris field. They attached tow cables to the frozen Ethelgard capital ships and began the slow process of dragging them into a stable orbit around Earth. Inside the Radiant Dawn, the emergency heaters were finally working, slowly raising the temperature on the bridge. Vex sat in his command chair, wrapped in a thermal blanket. He looked old. The vibrant orange of his skin had faded to a dull, ashen gray. His glowing eyes were dim. The screen in front of him showed Captain Thorne. The human had boarded the flagship via a shuttle, and was now standing on the bridge of the Radiant Dawn, surrounded by human marines in heavy, insulated environmental suits. You have won, Captain Thorne, Vex said, his voice raspy and weak. You have defeated the Grand Thermal Fleet. You have humiliated the Ethelgard Dominion. What happens now? Thorn stepped forward. He didn't wear an environmental suit. He wore his simple gray uniform, seemingly unaffected by the lingering chill of the bridge. What happens now is that we go home, Thorn said. We are going to strip your ships of their technology. We are going to take your stellar siphons, your plasma lances, and your slipspace drives. And then we are going to give you back your ships, and we are going to send you home. Vex frowned. You are letting us go? After we tried to glass your planet. We don't want your planet, Admiral, Thorn said. We just want to be left alone. You attacked us because you thought we were weak. You thought we were primitive. We are going to let you go back to your homeworld and tell your leaders what happened here. We want them to know that Earth is not a target. We want them to know that humanity is not prey. Vex looked down at his hands. They were still trembling from the cold. My leaders will not accept this defeat. The Dominion has never lost a war. They will build more ships. They will return with a larger fleet. They will burn your world to ash. Thorn smiled. It was a small, cold smile. Let them try. We have your fleet now. We have your technology. And we have the entropy anchor. If they come back, we won't just freeze their ships. We will freeze their stars. Vex looked up, his eyes widening in horror. You would extinguish a star? We would if we had to, Thorn said simply. You fight with fire, Admiral. We fight with the end of fire. Tell your leaders that. Tell them that if they ever enter the Sol system again, we will turn their Dyson swarms into ice. We will turn their homeworld into a frozen rock. We will bring the heat death of the universe to their doorstep. Vex stared at the human. He saw the absolute, unyielding resolve in Thorn's eyes. He realized then that the Ethelgard had made a fatal mistake. They had judged humanity by their technology, by their crude chemical rockets and dirty fission reactors. They hadn't realized that humanity's true strength wasn't in their machines. It was in their minds. It was in their willingness to look at the terrifying, cold reality of the universe and weaponize it. I will tell them, Vex whispered. I will tell them everything. Good, Thorn said. He turned and walked toward the airlock. Have your crew ready for transport. We will begin the thawing process once your ships are in secure orbit. It will take a few weeks, but your people will live. Consider it a gesture of good faith. Thorn paused at the airlock and looked back at Vex. You had a good run, Admiral. 10,000 years of victory is impressive. But the universe is old, and it is cold. And eventually the fire goes out. You just forgot how to live in the dark. The airlock hissed shut, and Thorn was gone. Vex sat in the silence of his broken bridge. He looked out the viewport at the gray, frozen husks of his fleet. The Ethelgard Dominion had never known defeat, until they faced humanity's warship. And in that defeat, they had learned the most terrifying lesson of all. The fire always goes out. The return of the Ethelgard fleet to their homeworld changed the galaxy forever. The Grand Thermal Fleet, once the pride of the Dominion, limped back into the Dyson swarm as a collection of frozen, battered wrecks. The news of the defeat spread like a wildfire through the Ethelgard society. The High Council, the ruling body of the Dominion, was thrown into chaos. They had built their entire civilization, their entire religion, on the premise of infinite heat and absolute victory. To be defeated by a species that weaponized the cold was not just a military loss. It was a theological crisis. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. The Ethelgard currency was based on energy credits. The loss of 500 capital ships, and the realization that their primary weapons were useless against human technology, caused the energy markets to crash. The subject worlds of the Dominion, seeing the weakness of their masters, began to rebel. The empire that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years began to fracture. Humanity, meanwhile, thrived. The technology stripped from the Ethelgard fleet sparked a new industrial revolution on Earth. The slipspace drives allowed humanity to expand beyond the Sol system. The plasma lances were reverse-engineered and integrated into human ship designs. But the most valuable prize was the knowledge. Humanity had proven that the Ethelgard's perfect equation was flawed. They had proven that heat was not the only power in the universe. Earth transitioned from a primitive, struggling world to a major galactic power. They did not seek to conquer the Ethelgard. They did not seek to rule the galaxy. They simply built a strong, impenetrable border around human space, guarded by the UNS Zero Point and a fleet of new entropy-equipped warships. The galaxy learned to respect humanity. They learned that humans were not just builders of crude chemical rockets. They were the masters of the dark. They were the species that looked at the terrifying, cold reality of the universe and said, "We can use this." Other species came to visit Earth. They came to trade. They came to learn. They were always welcomed, but they were always reminded of the rule. Do not attack Earth. It was a simple rule, but it was enforced by the memory of the Grand Thermal Fleet, frozen and broken in the void. Decades later, High Admiral Vex, now an old, retired man, sat in a garden on his homeworld. The garden was warm, bathed in the golden light of the Dyson swarm. He watched the sun, the captured star that powered his world. He used to look at the sun and feel pride. He used to feel the warmth and know that his people were the masters of the galaxy. Now he just felt a lingering chill. His grandson, a young Ethelgard boy with bright, glowing eyes, ran up to him. "Grandfather," the boy asked, "is it true? Did the humans really defeat the fleet with cold? Is it true that they can turn off the sun?" Vex looked at the boy. He saw the same arrogance, the same belief in the invincibility of heat that he had possessed all those years ago. "It is true," Vex said softly. "The humans did not defeat us with a bigger fire. They defeated us by showing us that the fire is temporary. They did not turn off the sun, my boy, but they showed us that the sun can be turned off." The boy frowned, confused. "But the sun is infinite. It will burn forever." Vex smiled, a sad, knowing smile. He looked up at the golden sky, at the endless light of the Dyson swarm. "Nothing burns forever," Vex said. "The universe is old, and it is cold. And the humans are the ones who hold the switch. Never forget that. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Because when the fire goes out, they will be the ones waiting in the dark." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He ran off to play in the warm grass. Vex sat alone in the garden. He closed his eyes and remembered the bridge of the radiant dawn. He remembered the biting cold. He remembered the dark, matte black hull of the Zero Point. He remembered the calm, tired eyes of Captain Elias Thorne. The Ethelgard Dominion had never known defeat, until they faced humanity's warship. And in that defeat they had found the truth. The fire always goes out, and humanity was the master of the cold. The end.